I have the new panel in, and there was a couple things I wanted to point out. In order to get it in down here, there's an angle on the bottom of the piece that slides under the step here. I'll show you this when I take it off, but I had to cut you can see daylight right through here. It's because I had to cut the angle and bend it back in order for it to clear the rocker panel. There's also a tab folded down here off the step that I cut and folded back. Since I'm not replacing any of this, I was in the way, so that made it possible for me to get it into place, and I can bend the angle back up and then weld it after that. So the other thing is, I have this piece here, which is the pillar cover, I believe they call it, and that from the roof down here to the cowl, this piece goes in and it covers that up and gets welded, and then it matches up down here to the cowl and then the lip for the windshield. So this gets spot welded into place. When you're cutting on removal, when you're cutting up here to cut this off, all of this right here is part of the roof section, so you want to make sure you just don't hack through everything and get it off. Same way with this. So what I did is I cut down low, then once I got the piece in, put this in place to get my mark, and then I cut it in there. This will get knocked back down and then welded on to the new piece back here. These were spot welds where the holes are at. Okay, I pulled the piece out. See there that there's the cab with it out of there. As I mentioned earlier, there's this angle right here. This angle goes down by the step, and you can see here that I cut it here and I bent it back this way so it would clear the step so I could get it in there. And when it's done, I'll take this tab, I'll fold it back, I'll weld it to the bottom of the step, I'll drill some holes through here and here, and I'll fold it back, weld it to the bottom of the step, and weld that seam back up right there. I told you about the other things. I have an assembly manual right here that shows me how many spot welds they used at the factory. So I'm just using that for reference. I marked my flange right here along the cowl panel, and I'll drill it out and I'll use that for my plug welds. Alright, I have the assembly out. It's hanging on the cherry picker. I drilled all of the weld plug holes. These holes along the top are under the dash, and these holes are the seam between the firewall and the cowl panel. I sprayed that with weld-through primer to keep that from rusting, because I won't be able to get to it later. On the cab, I did the same thing. I used the weld-through primer and I sprayed that along the seam here. Again, firewall to the cowl panel. I used the cherry picker to hold the assembly up while I was working on it, as well as to hold it in place as I positioned it and as I worked it up to where I wanted it. I tried to use a floor jack, but that didn't work very well, and this seemed to work out real nice. Okay, here I have the assembly in. I have my hook screwed into the upper fender nut, and then I have the cherry picker attached to the hook that holds it in place and gives me adjustments. Alright, this is the angle I was talking about that I had to cut and fold back to make clearance to get it in. And right here I had the same deal. There's a little tab on the rocker that I cut, and I folded that down out of the way. The pillar section right here has to go over the side of the cab step right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a clamp inside of the hinge hole, and that'll attach to the back of the step, and I'll tighten it and that'll squeeze it into place. Okay, up under the dash here there's a bracket that attaches the dashboard to the cowl panel and to the pillar section. That is right here. It needs to go behind the pillar section right here when you're installing it. If you don't, it'll end up on the inside of the cab and it'll just give you headaches later to get it in. You can also see all of the holes that I drilled underneath to attach under the dash cowl section to the upper cowl section. I'll just plug weld all of those. This is a clamp that I was talking about earlier. You can see that it's hooked onto the back side of the step right here. The other end's hooked inside of the hinge hole opening right there. The assembly is still high, and it needs to, it's still low, and it needs to be pried up. So what I'll do is I'll take pry bar, hook it under the lip right there, pry up against the floor pan, and tighten the clamp, and that'll slide the assembly into place where it belongs. Alright, you can see that I have the assembly all clamped up for welding. I have a bunch of clamps on it. You want it to be, the seam to be held together very tight while you're welding. Right now on the top where I'm going to start, I have clamps in between each plug hole. Down here I also have a bar clamp. You can see there. It's hooked right there from the lip of the cowl. Inside the other end is inside the transmission cover hole. The reason for that was so I could tighten up the joint right there between the cowl kick panel and the floor pan. Okay, down here the pillar section is clamped to the side of the step, and down here you can see that I folded the angle back up, no daylight now, and those holes there will get plug welded, and I also drilled holes up from the bottom, and I'll plug weld them from underneath. Up top here I have the pillar section seat clamped to the roof frame. I'll plug weld it right here, as well as here and right here. Inside I drilled more holes for plug welds. There's 4 of them, and I will weld those to the roof right there. I have the pillar cover fit. I think it'll be pretty good. That will run from the upper cowl section right here. Also is incorporated into the windshield lip. That'll get welded at the lip. Up top here where it transitions into the roof, this was leaded in at the factory, and I'm not going to do that. I will just go ahead and bondo that up. I have about a 32nd of an inch gap. That's what I should end up with. Down here I have a slight problem from the new assembly not being the same as the old. I have a gap right here between the upper cowl and the assembly, and I mentioned on the removal video that it was a little narrower. So I'm going to take this steel plate and plug weld it through those holes to the upper cowl, and then weld it underneath to the new assembly. On the inside, the fact that the new assembly is narrower, where it slides up over the upper cowl right here, doesn't seem to be a problem. It's pretty tight on the inside. The gap just seems to be on the outside. Alright, so assembly's in, it's all clamped up, and it's ready to be welded like I said. Before I started, I took some reference measurements, height, door height opening, width, the height of the holes for the door bolts, and all of that seems to look pretty good. So real close. So the other thing I did is I took that strap and I strapped that down below to the dolly, and then it goes up and it's strapped to the top of the drip rail. I didn't strap it to the step. Actually I did, and that was pulling the step up, so that's why I hooked it on the dolly. That's keeping that measurement in place real nice. So I'll weld it up, and this video will be part 1 of the installation, and then when I get to part 2 you'll get to see how it looks. See ya!